I had to go through the worst 3 weeks of my life due to acute sinusitis that escalated into a persistent endocrine fever. The throbbing pain in both of my temples kept pulsing relentlessly, as if someone was continuously hitting my head with a small hammer. The doctor prescribed me a handful of high-dose antibiotics combined with an extremely potent sedative. The side effects of those pills left my entire body in a state of severe exhaustion, keeping my mind constantly groggy and clouded. My circadian rhythm was completely and horribly disrupted. During the day, I would fall into restless, fitful sleep, only to wake up at night, feeling utterly empty and exhausted. The accumulation of long-term fatigue blurred the line between reality and the terrible hallucinations caused by sleep deprivation. It severely and alarmingly degraded my natural reflexes and logical judgment. I couldn't even clearly perceive time and space around me anymore. Everything before my eyes became hazy and distorted, like an old, glitched movie. That horrific incident happened at my family's old red brick house, which sat isolated in a remote rural area of Pennsylvania. There were absolutely no other structures around the house, just endless stretches of deserted cornfields. It was a late afternoon when a steady, ceaseless rain began to pour. The musty atmosphere and the chill of the rainwater started creeping up from the concrete floor. A thick, lonely darkness quickly enveloped the entire space inside the house. My parents had left early for the central town to buy extra groceries and some of my specific medications. However, they got stranded there overnight because the slick roads were too dangerous to drive back. I had to stay home alone in the dark house, with no one around to take care of me. To make matters worse, due to the complex stormy weather and the house's location tucked behind a large hill, my cell service was completely dead. The house was cut off from all connections to the outside world, turning into a lonely oasis in the middle of a thick sea of fog. While lying exhaustedly on the old sofa in the living room, I suddenly heard a strange sound coming from beneath the floorboards. It was a sequence of 3 short, dry, and rhythmic thuds rising from deep underground. The noise was faint but enough to shatter the suffocating silence of the house at that moment. At first, I tried to reassure myself that it was just the physical contraction of the old cast-iron water pipes suddenly hitting the cold rainwater. These old houses in rural Pennsylvania always made strange noises like that during the rainy season, which was completely explainable. I closed my eyes and pulled the blanket over my head, trying to find a fitful sleep to escape the torturing sinus pain. But less than 5 minutes later, that bizarre sequence of sounds echoed once again. This time, the noise was louder, clearer, and carried a highly deliberate rhythm rather than an accidental one. It sounded dense, completely lacking the characteristic resonance of metal expanding or contracting due to temperature. The sound felt heavy and terrifyingly patient, as if some solid object was tapping directly against the pipe wall. I realized I couldn't just keep lying there helplessly and let this baseless anxiety gnaw away at my mind anymore. If the large sewage pipe in the basement was truly severely clogged from the heavy rain pressure and caused a backup, the consequences would be horrific. I knew very well that my dad would be furious if his attic or basement was damaged or flooded with filthy waste. Curiosity mixed with an intense sense of unease urged me to take action immediately, instead of sitting still and wildly speculating. I tossed the blanket aside, stood up, and walked straight into the small storage room next to the kitchen. There, I picked up my dad's large iron-cased flashlight, a heavy-duty light with very high brightness that he usually used to patrol around the farm during harvest season. I clicked the switch, and a powerful beam of blue-white light immediately cut through the thick darkness enveloping the hallway. Taking a deep breath to gather what little composure I had left, I took slow steps toward the thick wooden door leading to the basement. Standing before the old door, I hesitated for a moment before turning the doorknob, preparing to step down into the hollow, deep, and musty space below. The basement door opened, blowing a blast of air thick with a musty odor mixed with the damp night earth into my face. But right after that, a foul, rotting stench hit my nose so hard it made me want to vomit. Gripping the handrail tightly, I shone my flashlight ahead and stepped down the freezing concrete stairs one by one. The deeper I went, the clearer that short, rhythmic tapping became, echoing right next to my ears. The sound was coming precisely from the large cast-iron sewage pipe running along the basement's red brick wall. I approached it, carefully scanning my flashlight beam along the gray, rust-covered pipe. At a bend, I discovered a sizable fracture caused by years of metal corrosion, exposing a pitch-black gap inside the drain pipe. Thinking a piece of rotten wood had been washed down from the yard, or a large sewer rat was trapped inside, I stepped closer. I pressed my eye near the crack while shining the powerful blue-white flashlight beam deep inside. Instantly, my entire body froze as if doused in ice water, and my heart seemed to skip a beat entirely. In utter shock, I realized that what was resting inside that cramped pipe was not debris, nor was it any wild animal I had ever known. Materializing under the flashlight beam was a completely and grotesquely deformed human face. The creature's skin was deathly pale, covered in slimy, pitch-black fluids, and caked with mud. He was curled up in an absurd, impossibly contorted position inside the extremely tight space of the cast-iron pipe. A bloodshot human eye, completely devoid of eyelids, stared straight back at me through the cracked opening. His gaze was vacant, yet filled with a wild frenzy, and a hunger that chilled me to the bone. The rhythmic, three-beat sound I had been hearing all this time was actually the sound of his 2 rows of teeth chattering violently together. He was violently slam-chattering his teeth directly against the cast-iron pipe wall to create that noise. This freakish entity showed no signs of pain, nor did he have any intention of making a sound to call for help. He just lay motionless in the darkness of the sewage pipe, glaring at me with a crazed expression that defied all human logic. Utter terror left my mind completely blank, and I no longer had enough time to think or retreat safely. I tried to take a step back to run up the stairs, but my trembling legs felt as if they were nailed flat to the freezing concrete floor. The exact moment I shifted the flashlight beam, the creature inside the pipe suddenly let out a horrifying screech through his teeth, tearing through the suffocating air. The large cast-iron pipe began to shake violently under a tremendous pressure coming from deep within the sewer system. At an unimaginable speed, the mutated man began using his gaunt, bloody fingers with torn nails to claw at the fracture. He frantically widened the gap in the iron pipe, trying to squeeze his head and bony shoulders out, heading straight for me. My survival instinct suddenly flared up intensely when I saw the threat advance into my immediate space. I let out a piercing scream, swung the heavy iron-cased flashlight in my hand, and smashed it hard against his protruding head. The metal strike made a dull thud, snapping his head to the side, but it seemed he felt absolutely no pain whatsoever. He grew even more frenzied as a slimy hand shot out of the pipe, lunging tightly around my ankle and giving it a ruthless yank. I crashed hard onto the freezing basement floor, the flashlight flying out of my grip and spinning across the concrete before stopping. The beam shone directly at the horrific sight of him, already wriggling half of his deformed upper body out of the sewage pipe. His entire body was hideously emaciated, drenched in pitch-black fluid and streaks of stagnant, foul blood. He lunged forward, completely overpowering me and pinning me down against the concrete floor. His rotting fingernails clawed frantically at my face and eyes, aiming to tear the flesh right off my face. I used every ounce of my remaining strength to push against his skeletal chest, struggling to shove the mad entity away. The overpowering stench from his mouth blasted directly into my nose, suffocating me as his 2 hands choked my neck, causing my vision to blur. I started to feel hot blood streaming down my face, thinking I would surely lose my life in this dark place. Right at the moment I was about to pass out from suffocation, the basement door above was violently kicked open with a loud crash. My dad flew down the stairs like an arrow, with an iron snow shovel in his hands, letting out a massive roar to save me. My dad rushed in like a wild beast, swinging the iron snow shovel hard into the madman's shoulder. The powerful strike forced him to loosen his grip and back away. The mutated freak glared at my dad with hateful, resentful eyes, then quickly retreated deep into the shadows of the basement corner. He slipped right back into the fractured pipe and vanished completely into the deep underground sewer system. That very night, I was rushed to the town hospital in a state of extreme panic. My face and neck were covered in deep, jagged claw marks that were already showing signs of severe infection. The doctors had to put numerous stitches in my bloody face, while administering a barrage of antibiotics and post-exposure shots. The local police arrived the next morning to take a report and search the entire basement. However, they were incredibly skeptical of my story, dismissing it as a mere hallucination caused by my high fever, combined with the side effects of the heavy sedatives. They quickly closed the case, logging it as a standard break-in by a mentally unstable homeless man. They also added that scouring the labyrinth of toxic underground pipes in this area was completely impossible, but my dad knew for a fact that everything I said was a horrific reality. Because with his own hands, he had recovered a patch of scalp covered in mud-matted hair and a few ripped-out fingernails still snagged on the sharp edge of the fractured cast-iron pipe. That terrible incident left a deep psychological scar on my family, especially my mother. She cried non-stop for days, terrified by how close she came to losing her only son. She was the one who firmly forced my dad to panic sell that haunting old house for a dirt-cheap price so we could move to the city immediately. Before moving out, my dad personally poured concrete to completely seal the basement entrance and every old drain pipe around the property. We left the past behind, but the horrifying questions remain forever open, with no one able to answer them. Who exactly was that freak, and where did he come from? How could a flesh-and-blood human survive and move so easily inside a cramped sewage pipe system filled with toxic gas? What twisted motive drove him to patiently slam his own teeth together just to lure me down to the basement that night? Even now, living in a modern apartment in the heart of the city, that fear has never once let me go. Whenever a steady rain begins to pour and the surrounding space goes dead silent, I twitch with intense unease. I unconsciously press my ear against the floor to listen in absolute terror. I am forever haunted by the thought that, from some tiny drain beneath the floorboards, the chattering click of those dry teeth will ring out once again. What you are about to hear is an experience that almost drove me insane. To be honest, I still think about it constantly, even though I have managed to regain some sense of calm over the months since it happened. This story unfolds pretty quickly, so I will just get straight to the point. I am a single guy in my early 30s, living alone with no pets in an isolated loft apartment in a small town just outside of Chicago. The apartment is very modest, with just one bedroom, one bathroom, a living room, a kitchen, a dining area, and a small hallway leading to the fire escape. That is pretty much it. My life was absolutely great. Thanks to my freelance work as a video editor, I could manage my own schedule without having to answer to anyone, whether it was a girlfriend, parents, or a boss. Freedom has always been my top priority, so I constantly tried to maximize it whenever possible. I know many people live differently and might judge this somewhat immature lifestyle, but everyone has their own priorities and preferences. As long as no one judges me, I will not judge them. However, extreme freedom definitely comes with its downsides. I developed a few bad habits that I am sure many would disapprove of. One of them was my incredibly chaotic daily routine and sleep schedule. For some reason, I am always most productive late at night. Because of that, I regularly stayed up all night until dawn and caught up on sleep during the day. That is just how my body operates, and unless forced, I saw no reason to change it. One night, I was up very late, and I am talking way past 2 in the morning. I was sitting at my desk, completely focused on finishing some video editing projects on my computer. I was in the zone, to the point where I did not even have any music playing. Imagine being in a state of absolute flow. That was exactly how I felt at the time. The room was dead silent, just me with my thoughts, the clicking of my keyboard, and the unfinished work. Suddenly, the dead silence was ripped apart by an incredibly bizarre noise. It was a violent metallic scratching sound, coming from right inside the galvanized tin ventilation system running along the ceiling. The heavy, frantic dragging noise moved with clear intent from the direction of the living room, heading straight toward my bedroom. Immediately after, 3 or 4 violent thuds pounded from inside the vent down onto the metal grate covering the bedroom ceiling. The blunt impacts were so loud and forceful that the iron grate rattled violently, as if someone was using their bare hands to smash it from inside that cramped space. I bolted out of my chair so fast that I slammed my knee against the edge of the desk, knocking over my computer monitor. I was completely shocked and froze, the event happening too suddenly for me to react. Just imagine being inside your own loft apartment at 2 in the morning, surrounded by absolute silence, only to be suddenly interrupted by loud scratching and slamming right above your head. That was, and still is, the most terrifying experience of my life. Standing up at that moment was purely a natural reflex of my body. After that, I completely froze in place. My eyes were glued to the ventilation grate on the bedroom ceiling. terrified as I waited for the next moment that I knew for sure would happen. I was terrified that the iron grate would be kicked open and something horrific would drop down, forcing me into a life-or-death struggle with an intruder in the pitch blackness. But that moment never came. I did not hear any more noise. There was not even the sound of dragging or sliding inside the metal duct. Everything went dead silent again, as if I had imagined the whole thing. But I was 100% sure I did not mishear it. I have no idea how long I stood there rooted to the spot, but my body was completely paralyzed and I could not move. It felt exactly like sleep paralysis. I was wide awake and not dreaming. Then finally I heard a sharp clawing sound drag a long way, heading back toward the main hallway of the duct system. So there really was something inside the vents. I do not know why, but hearing that sound move seemed to jumpstart my frozen brain. Without thinking, I grabbed a large flashlight and a metal bar detached from my monitor stand on the desk, then rushed out of the room. I did not even bother to tiptoe or stay quiet. I screamed at the top of my lungs like a madman. "Get the hell out! I know you are in there." I hoped the massive rush of adrenaline would give me strength. I ran all over the apartment, shining the flashlight along the joints of the ceiling vents while yelling furiously, but I found absolutely no sign of life. My loft apartment is very small, and this duct system only passes through a few rooms before heading straight out to the main utility shaft in the building hallway. Yet, after thoroughly searching every single corner and checking all the cabinets below, there was still no sign of any person or creature. Even stranger, all the doors, glass windows, and even the steel fire escape door of the apartment were still securely locked from the inside. This left me even more confused and bewildered. My temporary bravery vanished entirely, replaced by a deep, overwhelming terror that began to consume my mind. I ran like hell back to the bedroom, locked the wooden door, and shakingly called the town police. While waiting for the police to arrive, I listened silently for any movement around me, but I did not hear any more noise from the ceiling. When the 2 police officers arrived, they went around and searched the entire apartment with me once more, but still found nothing unusual. I pointed up at the ceiling and insisted that someone had crawled into the ventilation system to get to my bedroom. One of the officers looked skeptical, using a high-powered flashlight to shine through the metal grate of the bedroom vent. Then, they decided to use a screwdriver to take down the entire grate frame and shone the light straight deep inside the galvanized tin duct. "Hey man, take a look at this." I stepped closer, looked where the flashlight was pointing, and felt a cold shiver run down my spine. The inside of the metal vent was shiny, covered in a thin layer of dust from over the years, but it was completely empty. There was not a single scratch, not a single handprint, and most importantly, the entire duct was way too narrow. The officer shook his head at me. "This duct is less than 6 inches wide, sir. Even a newborn baby could not fit in there, let alone an intruder." He went on to suggest that maybe I was overworked, experiencing auditory hallucinations from sleep deprivation, or that it might have just been a large sewer rat running through. I had to use every ounce of self-control not to lose my mind at him right then and there. It could not be a rat. What kind of rat could make loud pounding sounds and heavy scratching like a person? But the undeniable reality right in front of me could not be argued with. No human being could possibly fit or move inside that cramped space, unless I really was losing my mind. But I knew I was completely sane. For the entire week that followed, my mental state completely collapsed. My rational mind refused to accept that I had imagined something so vivid and terrifying, but I also could not find any logical explanation for what my own ears had heard. My mental state is much more stable now, but there was a period when I had serious trouble eating, sleeping, and working. I could not focus on my computer screen for more than 10 or 15 minutes without looking up at the gaping hole in the ceiling. I had to use duct tape to completely seal off all the ventilation grates in my apartment, choosing to live in a suffocating atmosphere rather than hear that sound ever again. To this day, the only explanation I can use to comfort myself is that maybe the noise came from another source outside the building, and the tin duct system acted as an amplifier, making it feel like it was right above my head. However, every time I look back, that theory completely falls apart. How could a sound from the outside move sequentially and precisely along the axis of the pipe from the living room straight into my bedroom? And why did those violent, heavy thuds happen exactly at the location of the bedroom ventilation grate, right above the spot where I usually lie down? Tonight, as I sit here writing these lines down, The surroundings have fallen back into the dead silence of the 2 in the morning hour. I just heard a faint noise. It is no longer coming from the sealed ventilation vent. It is coming from right inside the drywall directly behind my back. If you have ever lived in a house in the Pacific Northwest during the winter, you will understand what it feels like to be completely enveloped by the sound of rain falling on a metal roof. It is not simply the sound of the weather, but more like a giant wall of white noise that washes away every other sound from the outside world. My family's house sits tucked away deep inside a dead-end alley in a windy suburb of Oregon. This place is surrounded by towering pine trees that remain damp all year round, always cloaked in a gloomy atmosphere. My house has a rather peculiar architectural design that many people would call bizarre when they see it for the first time. The sloped brick roof of the house stretches down very low from the second floor in a sharp, intimidating diagonal line. This places the edge of the roof and the metal gutter system right next to the top of my first floor bedroom window. Normally, this structure does not cause any major issues except for creating heavy, rushing sounds whenever there is a downpour. However, there is an annoying detail that I constantly have to deal with, which is that the gutter of this sloped roof gets clogged very easily. It only takes a few strong gusts of wind for dry pine needles to fall from above and jam themselves tightly inside the gutter. When debris and leaves build up too much, the rainwater can no longer drain properly through the regular downspouts. It overflows the edge of the gutter and pours straight down onto my bedroom window glass, creating heavy, rapid thumping noises. I always have to explain in advance to friends who come over that it is just a frustrating flaw in the architectural design. I tell them this so they do not startle in fear whenever they hear strange, scraping sounds right against the wall at night. That weekend, a massive storm suddenly hit the area where we lived, bringing violent gusts of wind. The sky turned a dull gray from midday, and the entire surroundings felt completely drenched in water. My parents unexpectedly had to go on a business trip to another city, and they would be away until the end of Sunday. Staying alone in a large, isolated house right on the edge of the woods during a stormy night is not a pleasant experience. Therefore, I decided to invite my girlfriend, Anna, to stay over for the weekend so we could get through these days together. Anna is naturally a rather timid girl who always feels insecure when facing overly large, empty spaces. My bedroom is located on the first floor, right beneath the foot of the house's strange sloped roof, with a large glass window facing the backyard. That backyard is a pitch-black area all year round with no outdoor lights, completely overgrown with dense wild bushes. The location of the bedroom allows me to hear even the smallest disturbance coming down from the sloped roof in a very direct way. It acts like a miniature observation post for the entire building, helping me keep track of what is happening around me. When I picked Anna up and brought her to the house, I told myself that I had a responsibility to keep her completely at peace throughout the evening. I knew she was terrified of the darkness of the wilderness and would often jump at the strange sounds of nature out there. We had dinner together and then turned on an old TV series in the bedroom to create a cozy atmosphere in the room. I tried to ignore the wind howling through the pine trees outside and pulled the window curtains tightly shut to block out the coldness of the stormy night. Around midnight, while Anna and I were lying in the quiet bedroom watching TV, a strange sound appeared. It was not the steady patter of rain or the familiar wind howling through the pine needles in the yard. It was a prolonged, heavy, and unusual scraping noise that cut right through the white noise of the storm. Immediately after, a dull, sharp thud echoed straight down from the sloped roof, right above our headboard. This sound caught my attention instantly because it sounded so close, as if a heavy object had just dropped onto the roof. I looked over at Anna and saw that her face was starting to show clear signs of anxiety, so I had to quickly find a way to reassure her. I tried to rationalize the situation by telling myself that maybe a dead pine branch had been snapped by the storm and fallen onto the roof. Or perhaps it was a stray raccoon trying to find a dry place to shelter inside the gutter line. However, that strange noise did not stop, but began to move along the slippery brick roof. There was a friction sound of something slowly and heavily dragging itself right against the exterior wall outside the window. This sound occurred at such a close distance that the initial sense of safety inside the room was completely shattered. The situation forced me to get out of bed instead of staying put and go outside to check the reality. I did not want Anna to experience a sense of panic or fear because of these noises of unknown origin. I gently stepped out of bed, reached over to grab my flashlight, and took my thick coat hanging on the door rack. I told Anna to stay right there in the room and lock the door from the inside until I came back. I walked alone down the hallway leading to the back door of the house, where a small path led out to the flooded yard. When I opened the door and stepped outside, the freezing storm wind slapped my face immediately, and the weak light from my phone flashlight became way too faint. I stood under the porch roof and tried to aim the thin beam of light up at the steep, sloped roof above my head. The first clue appeared when the flashlight swept across the gutter area, where water was overflowing furiously. I discovered a large black plastic trash bag sitting precariously up there. This trash bag was originally thrown by me into the covered trash bin, placed in the corner of the yard the afternoon before. Now, it had been ripped open by someone, causing a few pieces of garbage to get jammed inside the gutter, completely blocking the flow. The unease in my heart began to grow, because my explanation about a raccoon or a broken branch was starting to fall apart. A small animal could never have enough strength to haul a heavy trash bag up such a steep and slippery roof. However, because it was too cold and I wanted to end this quickly, I went to grab a long pole in the corner of the yard. I used all my strength to shove that ripped, black trash bag down to the ground to clear the water piling up on the gutter. The strange noise on the window glass stopped immediately, and the space returned to the steady sound of falling rain. I hurried back inside the house, locked the back door tightly, and walked back to my bedroom with a sense of relief. I told Anna that everything had been taken care of, and it was just a minor incident caused by the weather. We turned off the TV and closed our eyes to drift into sleep together, thinking that this bizarre event had truly ended. Around 3 a.m., while I was craving sleep, and Anna beside me had been fast asleep. For a long time a new sound appeared. It was no longer the light noise of the trash bag, or the rapid thumping of overflowing water like the incident at midnight. It was the sound of bare feet stepping very heavily and slowly, directly on the bare bricks of the sloped roof. This sound moved in a deliberate manner from high above along the diagonal line, then stopped right at the position above the head of my bed. I instantly became wide awake in the pitch-black darkness of the room and felt a clear rush of cold air running down my spine. I realized that no tree branch or wild animal could create a two-legged walking rhythm that was so distinct and purposeful. My heart began to beat faster than ever, but I did not dare to turn on the room light because I was afraid it would alert the mysterious intruder outside. I lay perfectly still, holding my breath, aiming my eyes at the ceiling, and tried to focus all my hearing to listen for the next movements. There was a friction sound of a rough layer of clothing drenched in rainwater, pressing tightly against the exterior wall of the bedroom. That slow footstep finally came to a complete halt right at the edge of the sloped roof, where it met the top of the window frame. Immediately after, there was a light tapping of fingernails against the upper glass pane of the bedroom window in a steady rhythm. The boundary of safety of this room, which I had always tried my best to maintain, was completely and ruthlessly shattered. The person standing out there was clearly not a lost wanderer passing by accident. He knew for certain that someone was inside the room. The action of tapping on the glass repeatedly in the middle of a storm felt like a taunting challenge, pushing the tension to the absolute maximum. I understood that I could no longer pretend as if nothing was happening or hide beneath the warm blankets anymore. I gently and slowly pushed Anna's arm off me so that I would not startle her awake. I sat up slowly in the darkness, my whole body trembling with fear, but I tried not to make any minor noise. I stood frozen for a few seconds before the tightly closed window curtain, hesitating between pulling it open to face it or continuing to back down. Finally, I took all my courage, brought my cold, sweat-drenched hand up to grab the edge of the curtain, and prepared for the worst. I pulled back a small corner of the window curtain and glanced up toward the sloped roof in the sudden flash of lightning from the storm. A horrifying visual shock appeared at an extremely close distance, causing all the blood in my body to instantly freeze. That person was not standing on the ground as I had previously imagined, but his entire body was lying flat on the steep brick roof. He was pressing his gaunt, rain-drenched frame tightly against the window glass, looking down from the sloped roof above. His face was completely upside down and was only a few centimeters away from my face, separated by a thin layer of glass. By pure human survival instinct, I let out a terrified scream and violently startled backward. I collapsed onto the cold floor, my hands clawing desperately to pull the window curtain completely shut to block out that sight. Through the flashing lightning and the weak flashlight, I managed to clearly catch the unusual details on that man's face. It was a completely bald head with no hair at all, featuring a pale, slimy skin that looked soaked from being in the rain for hours. Most distinct of all were his eyes, which were wide open, staring straight at me without blinking a single time during that moment of confrontation. His mouth stretched into a twisted, deformed smile because he was actively pressing his cheek and nose tightly against the glass, to the point where the flesh flattened out. He was wearing a set of old, thin, ragged patient clothes covered in mud and streaks of wild grass. There were no ropes or support tools around to explain how he could maintain his grip on that slippery roof in the middle of a storm. My terrified scream in the dark immediately jolted Anna awake, and she sat up straight in bed. She witnessed me panicking and sobbing on the floor while catching sight of the blurry, upside-down figure outside the window. Anna also let out a scream of pure terror and tightly covered her head as the figure outside began to strike his head hard against the glass. I scrambled for the phone dropped on the floor, tried to crawl further away from the window, and tremblingly dialed 911. The police patrol arrived at my house about 15 minutes later, with their siren lights flashing loudly throughout the neighborhood. 2 police officers quickly drew their weapons, stepped out of their car, and turned on high-powered flashlights to sweep away the darkness. They worked together to set up a specialized ladder and climbed up to inspect the entire surface of the sloped brick roof. However, the result came back completely empty, as no one was up on the roof at that time, because the storm was still pouring down furiously. Any biological traces, fingerprints, or mud marks on the glass window had been completely washed away. The officers continued to walk around the house to check the entrance doors and the security locks on the first floor. Every single entry point into the house remained tightly locked from the inside, showing absolutely no signs of forced entry. The police looked at Anna and me with an empathetic yet slightly exhausted expression after a long night of working in the pouring rain. One of them gently explained to me that the violent gusts of wind combined with the shadows of the old pine trees might have caused an illusion. He suggested that fatigue and the fear of a dark, isolated space had tricked my vision for a brief moment. The officer's routine, reassuring explanation began to make Anna fall into a state of confusion herself. She turned to look at me and softly asked if I was absolutely certain that I had seen an upside-down human face outside the window. The indifference of those around me and the immense psychological pressure made me begin to doubt what my own eyes had just witnessed. After taking a report of the incident and offering a few basic security tips, the police officers got into their car and drove away. They left behind a bone-chilling silence inside the house as the massive storm outside began to clear up near dawn. Anna and I both agreed that neither of us dared to go back to sleep in that first-floor bedroom for a single second longer. We took our blankets and pillows, moved up to the living room on the second floor, and huddled together on the long sofa. Just when everything seemed to have temporarily calmed down and the fear in our hearts began to fade, a new sound appeared. It was the familiar, steady tapping rhythm, but this time it did not come from the glass window on the first floor. That terrifying sound was echoing straight down from the glass pane of the skylight, located high up, on the second-floor living room ceiling. I looked up in utter helplessness and saw a long streak of water dragging along with the crawling movement of someone on the glass. The unusual threat out there had not disappeared at all. The man on the roof was still hovering right above our heads, trying to look inside.